As far as Russia and China are concerned, they now need to protect their currencies from an impending collapse of the fiat currency system, of the dollar-based fiat currency system. And I think that's where we are. And I think that this is why this BRICS meeting in Kazan is actually so important.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for October 7th through October 14th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature Australian silver kangaroos at just $2.99 over spot. Next, backdated 1-ounce gold Canadian maples are just $60 over spot. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're always privileged to have this distinguished returning guest, Alasdair Macleod, a former bank director, also the head of research at goldmoney.com, and also the founder of Macleod Finance on Substack, is here with us again. Today is Wednesday, October 9th, 2024. Alasdair, thank you for rejoining us here on Liberty and Finance.
That's my pleasure, DK.
I'm trying not to look disheveled today, and I hope it's working because we've been making pretty prudent and furious precautions ahead of the approaching Hurricane Milton, which is coming across the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico directly. The eye of it is going to go directly over our house about 12 to 15 hours from now. So we're trying to just stay calm. We're well inland in a very well-drained sandy area at some good elevation, about an hour and a half drive from the coast. So we will not be subject to any type of storm surge, but you never know with high winds and potential tornadoes that can be spun off by these major hurricanes, what might happen. But our neighborhood is constructed of cement dwellings, and everyone is sheltering in place, and we're not under any evacuation orders. So anyway, if I seem a little out of breath, it's because we've been making final preparations here. And, but it's maybe perhaps that's metaphorical for what's going on in our world geopolitically and financially. You write about this frequently on your channel, and recently you've been writing about the upcoming BRICS summit of nations that are outside and separating themselves from the, I would say, Anglo American, financial world that has been dominating for most of the past century, and instead marching to their own drummer and trying to protect themselves going ahead. And you've written about what we can expect coming out of the upcoming summit later this month, and whether we're going to see a new trade settlement currency, whether we're going to see any backing of their shared currencies by gold, etc., what that might mean for the financial lives of all of us living in the West. Can you bring us up to date on your latest research in that area?
Yeah, it's coming at quite a delicate time because, we've got the Ukraine, as far as what Russia calls a special military operation, which Russia seems to be winning. And we've also got the Middle East, which is really very, very concerning. And when you look at the backing for Israel and look at the backing or the relationship between Russia and Iran, this is effectively, it's looking like another proxy war against Russia. When you look through the parties who are going to get hurt in this. And of course, this is all happening ahead of the BRICS meeting in Kazan. There are, I think, two main things which are of interest to us. The one is how many new countries are going to join BRICS, or will be, if you like, slated to join BRICS. I think that the Russians' idea is that in terms of voting, because to put something on the summit agenda requires unanimous approval from all BRICS members. I think that the Russian approach to this is to have what they call partner countries, which you and I would probably call associated nations. And that way, they can have the benefits, if you like, of BRICS membership without having a veto on on what goes on the agenda and so on and so forth. So I think we could see quite a lot of countries joining. I think back in end of June, Russia asked all the members of the BRICS to nominate, the 10 countries they thought would benefit most, or they would like to see to join BRICS as a result of the Kazan summit. So I don't know how that's changed. I mean, since then we've seen up to 40 or maybe slightly more than 40 countries interested in joining BRICS, expressed an interest in joining BRICS. And the last one I heard was Cuba. I mean, that's right on your doorstep. There are twice as many other countries on the sidelines watching the situation. And I think we have to appreciate that this is actually very difficult for countries potentially joining because a lot of them owe dollars. They, in the past, they have seen that if they don't exactly toe the American line, the cost of their debt goes shooting up, like interest rates go shooting up, a pump and dump, as it were, as the Chinese put it, actually. And on top of that, of course, the Americans quite happily arrange for regime change. I mean, that's the way they keep the world in order, as it were. So this is really something which everybody's very much aware of. And then you've got trade interests. India in particular does substantial trade with, if you like, the Western nations as well as with Asian nations and China. So you've got all these sort of interests which have got to be balanced, and you have members who will not want to upset the status quo as such. But I think it's changing. I mean, to have this sort of momentum building up, I think, if I was a president or a prime minister of a country in Africa, for example, I'd feel slightly more secure given the numbers who are now trying to join BRICS. So that means it's less likely that I would be targeted, if you like, by American sanctions, regime change, whatever. So I think that's a very, very important point. So that from America's point of view, the momentum is going away from America in terms of its hegemony over the world. And this becomes a bit of an open question as to whether they might try and do something about it before the BRICS meeting. On that, we just don't know. But the other issue, of course, at the BRICS meeting will be the one which got aired in Johannesburg but never actually made the agenda, and that was the Russians' proposal to establish a new trade settlement currency to replace the dollar. And if you're going to replace the dollar, then you've got to have something better than the dollar. And so, the thought was that this new trade settlement currency would be somehow backed by gold. There's been a lot of talk about that ever since, and a lot of it, I think, has been very, very misleading. I mean, you see proposals. There was a proposal for something called the unit, for example. And that was actually, it was put together by a Russian and a Chinese guy. And you sort of think that these are appointees by, Russia and China. No, they weren't. They're fund managers who sort of came up with this idea of a unit. But it was quite clear from their structure that they don't understand credit. There was absolutely no mention of credit in the new unit. And the other thing is that they try and make it sort of ultra complicated by talking about introducing CBDCs and digitalization and, all Uncle Tom, blockchain and, the whole sort of thing. I mean, the answer with something like this is just keep the damn thing simple. And that, I think, is actually what's likely to happen. Now, interestingly, Pepe Escobar, who is very well informed, wrote an article for a Russian think tank where there was this sort of throwaway line at the end, which basically said that, the idea that some sort of ruble and yuan and gold currency, will bring back sound money to replace the dollar. And that is where the conversation is now going. And I think that does make sense. It's interesting that this was for a Russian think tank, which is apparently quite close, is regarded by the US Treasury, actually, which has put it on the sanctions list, to be mouthpiece for the government, or very, very close to the government. So I think what Pepe Escobar was saying was, in effect, not being denied, if you like, by the establishment not too far away from President Putin. So that is interesting. And I think the other beauty about this is that the idea of, sort of a basket of currencies backed by gold, which is complete nonsense, gets thrown out of the window. Instead, the sensible strategy is to say, well, look, here is this new trade settlement currency. It's backed by gold. You can convert it into gold if you want, etc., etc. Use it if you wish. It's up to consenting parties. That's the way forward. And I think that's probably what China and Russia understand. But the other thing that comes out of this, I think, is very important. And that is that while Russia clearly sees the benefits of putting the ruble onto a gold standard, not least to show the contrast, if you like, between the ruble and a fiat dollar, but it would appear that China is moving in that direction as well. Now, why would this be? I think, firstly, because America is getting very belligerent, not just in the Middle East, and also, of course, in the Pacific. So this is something which the Chinese do recognize is becoming a problem. It's becoming a threat, if you like, to both Russia and China and their mutual plans. It's a threat which they can either ignore, or alternatively, quite frankly, I think America is taking on too much. I mean, I don't think they'd win against Russia. I don't think that they would ever manage to break up Russia, which, has been the stated objective for some considerable time. So I think America is on a losing wicket, not only in the Ukraine, but I think also in the Middle East. And the unfortunate thing, of course, that Israel gets sacrificed sacrificed. Israel is bust, and is having to fight for its very survival. It needs America there to help it. I don't think the America's going to win against this one. And if I'm right in that, then you could say that as far as the alliance between Russia and China is concerned, they don't need to do anything. That's been Chinese policy. Just stand back, let America make all the mistakes. And it's been a winning policy. So why not continue? But this is something which has probably run its course because of the debt situation in America. The fact that the two largest foreign buyers of US Treasury debt are now net sellers, as Japan and China, for different reasons. The fact that America is now in a debt trap. This is a point which is recognized by multiple central banks who've been selling dollars. They've been adjusting their currency reserves, if you like, dumping dollars, even dumping euros in return for gold. What does that tell you? They're going into gold, they're getting out of fiat. These are alarm bells, which we, which we ignore. We sort of just think, well, gold's going up. Okay, central banks are buying it. We don't know why they're buying it, but they seem to be buying it. The idea that they want to hold on to pet rocks, well, doesn't make any sense. But it does make huge sense if you understand the difference between fiat money, which is credit, unattached to any value whatsoever, depending entirely on the faith in it, initially by foreigners and then eventually by the domestic users of that currency, compared with real legal money, which is internationally accepted, which is gold. So this is actually a very, very serious point we've arrived at. But getting back to the situation as far as Russia and China are concerned, they now need to protect their currencies from an impending collapse of the fiat currency system, of the dollar-based fiat currency system. And I think that's where we are. And I think that this is why this BRICS meeting in Kazan is actually so important. If Russia and China don't act soon, and this seems to me to be a pretty good opportunity, if you like, have a facility, if you like, for trade settlement and the purchase of commodities, being priced effectively in gold through rubles and through yuan. If you have that, then this is a Trojan horse, if you like, into the destruction, the ending of this fiat currency regime, which is serving nobody any good at all. Just look what's happened to the purchasing power of our currencies, since 1971. I mean, they've diminished to less than 1% of what they were then. This has done none of us any good at all. It's just allowed the political class to spend way above their resources. For what benefit? Impoverishing us all in the process. And we are actually coming towards an end of that. So from the point of view of Russia and China, I think quite clearly this could be the moment when they have to take the decision. Are we going for it or not? It's their call. So Kazan, I think, is desperately important.
This is very eye-opening because you've spoken to us for some time, as have others, about the prudent actions being taken by the BRICS consortium of countries to shore up their strategic, tangible asset reserves, specifically gold, in the face of fragility and the debt trap, the death spiral of the Western fiat-based financial system. But you just put a pin right in it here, saying they have also had fiat currencies, and if the whole fiat currency system goes down, theirs may go down with it. Therefore, they've got to get the new one up and running before that tumultuous event, for self-preservation. That's a way of expressing it that I have not heard in that way before. In fact, I was going to ask you anyway, for people who are new to our channel or new to even thinking about these things, because we're not being exposed to these concepts on the mainstream financial press or the mainstream, nightly news or anything. So the vast majority of those in America, at least, are absolutely ignorant of any of even the acronyms, BRICS, et cetera, and let alone the concepts and the fundamentals behind it. But to the ordinary person who's just waking up now, and there's a very rapidly growing fringe, both of your subscriber base as well as ours, they may say, well, why do we care what China, Russia, Brazil, India, South Africa, and some related countries are doing to settle trade between themselves? Let them do what they want. We're perfectly fine. Good old made in USA or England and USA and so on. But that's what I was going to ask you is, could you please draw the explicit consequences to those living in the West of this tidal sea change being made quickly by those in the East? And maybe you just put your finger on it for us, is that if the whole fiat system is coming down, they're the ones who are realizing they've got to have a new system to carry forward. Any further aspects on that the ordinary person can understand?
Americans are not alone in this. The average Brit, the average European, the average person has got no concept of these dangers at all, because they've never come across it, I think. And not only that, but our governments, God bless them, fill us with propaganda. The level of propaganda coming out of government and the way in which mainstream media is coerced into repeating it is really quite frightening. Of course, what they're now doing, I'm getting off topic a little bit, but what they're now doing is they're looking at ways of trying to clamp down on the dissent, if you like, dissenters, people who are not parroting the official line, sort of, if you like, social media, whatever, conspiracy theorists and all the rest of it.
Well, actually, we had some experts who were targeted in the past year here as purveyors of malinformation, a new term which had to be created because they could not be disproven as misinformation because it was actually true. It was just against the stated narrative of the government and therefore was determined to be malinformation and therefore shut down and censored as well.
Yeah, it's anyway, we're getting off topic. All I'm saying is that this is a common problem, and it's not just confined to Americans. Who are notoriously sort of inward-looking. I mean, there's no world beyond America for the vast majority of Americans because they don't travel. I think statistics say that something, 15-20% of Americans have a passport. The rest don't. But this is shared with everyone. But as to your question, the dangers of a fiat currency collapse are that really what we're talking about is a loss of purchasing power for the fiat currencies. Now, that means that the purchasing power of your dollar goes down. The way in which this usually works or has worked in the past, and I see no reason why it shouldn't be different now, is that the run on the currency starts with foreign owners bailing out. And so we are already seeing, as I said earlier, we're already seeing China and Japan turning net sellers of US treasuries and net sellers of the dollar. And that is something that is likely to increase. The fact, as I said, that central banks around the world are selling fiat currencies, particularly the dollar, which is, the king rat of fiat currencies, in return for real money, which is gold, also confirms this trend that the foreigners basically are getting rid of dollars and going into real money. There will come a point where there is a wider awakening of the problems which are leading to a collapse in the purchasing power of the dollar. We saw a start of this with the Fed cutting interest rates by 50 basis points, in September, when 25 basis points was expected. Now, what's called point difference between friends? It's not that material, but in terms of indicating the way the Fed policy is going, it was a very, very strong suggestion that the dilemma that the Fed faces in terms of high interest rates killing the economy or a weaker dollar, they've chosen the weaker dollar route. So again, the foreigners know that this fiat currency's purchasing power is going down. Then we have the problem of how does the US government fund its deficit? I mean, that's already run up to 35.6 trillion or something. You have got the debt limit being reset on the 2nd and 3rd of January, which is after the presidential election and just before the new president takes office, I think, because I think they take office on the 6th of January or thereabouts. So, if I was Kamala Harris or if I was Donald Trump, I would want to get that ceiling raised as much as possible to give me room to spend, or room, if you like, to sort the economy, or however you like to put it. So how about 40 trillion? And, we could get there quite quickly. So all this is feeding into a crisis for the dollar. Now, when the dollar's purchasing power goes down, interest rates rise, which means that banks and businesses start going bust. The cost of funding, of US Treasury funding, rises materially. And guess what? They're then definitely in a debt trap. So how do they manage this? Well, they've got to rescue the whole caboodle, which basically means they've got to devalue the currency by printing currency to replace contracting back credit. I mean, I'm not quite sure how this is really going to play out, but you can see that this is a situation for which there is no easy solution. And there will come a time when the average American begins to realize that it's not prices going up, but it's the purchasing power of the dollar going down. Now, the great Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises opined that when the users of a currency finally realize that it's the currency going down, then it's at it. That's the end of it. And so the only question remaining is how quickly could this happen? Well, I think it probably depends to an extent on what comes out of Kazan. I mean, if the Russians and the Chinese do back their own currencies, for limited purposes, perhaps initially, like, cross-border trade settlement in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS, then that could accelerate the decline in the dollar very, very quickly. And once it starts going, the question will be asked increasingly, what's your faith in the US government's management of the dollar? How's it today? How are you seeing it? This is how it will affect ordinary people. And of course, it means that those on fixed income, the elderly in particular, who are living off savings, the unemployed, the poor, they're going to get hit very, very hard by this. The middle classes will find that their wealth is wiped out. Quite a lot of the wealthy people will also really suffer, though generally there is a sweet spot for them, and that is, the rarely wealthy. They manage to find ways out of this, one way or the other. But there will come a point where I think even they're going to have a problem. And because this is going to be everywhere, and I'm not just talking America, I'm talking about the euro, I'm talking about the yen, I'm talking about sterling, even the Swiss franc. There's going to be no hiding from this. You can't just sort of get out into a firm currency or, a proper gold substitute, because where's the gold substitute? I mean, it's only going to be for trade purposes, perhaps, for if you're Russian, Chinese, or in BRICS. So for those of us in the West who would probably be stopped from participating in this anyway, from buying yuan or whatever, on that basis, this is going to be very bad news for everybody. And this is why I tell people, those who are prepared to listen, for goodness sake, get out of credit and get into gold, which is real money, real legal money since Roman times, and it still is, despite the propaganda of governments who say it's no more than a pet rock.
Now, in addition to writing about geopolitics and the global financial edifice and gold, you've recently written about silver as well, which is, I got my attention because it's not what I usually see coming from you. Could you explain to people why silver has your attention at the moment?
Yeah, silver's, people call it the poor man's gold. Silver is a monetary metal, but it's not valued as such. It's valued on industrial grounds, and that value, I have to say, is somewhat suppressed. It has been in supply deficit, according to the Silver Institute, for the last 4 years, which is a crazy situation. I think just purely on commercial fundamentals, I would see silver going quite a lot higher anyway. As gold gets more and more in the forefront of replacing credit, if you like, in people's ideas of value, how do we protect ourselves? Then silver is going to rise even quicker. Bear in mind, silver relative to gold has been in a long-term bear market. I mean, Diocletian's edict of maximum prices put the ratio at 12. If you look at what Sir Isaac Newton was saying, he was saying, I think something like 14.5 or 15.5. The big slide really was in about 1870 when Germany, in the wake of the Franco-Prussian War, actually it was a bit later than 70, it was probably about 74, 75, came off the silver standard, having got gold reparations out of France. So they went on to a gold standard. And from that point, really, there was virtually nobody on a silver standard in Europe. And the price fell because it was no longer reflecting its moneyness, if you like. It wasn't a standard except for small amounts. In this country, it's legal tender for 40 shillings, which is £2. But any more than that, it's not legal tender. So this is the sort of problem that silver has faced. The current level of the relationship between gold and silver is a ratio of around about 83, 84 as we speak. That, in my mind, is absolutely crazy. It is far too high, given the circumstances that we're seeing of the early stages of a collapse of fiat currencies. It is purely mispriced. And I was interested to see that about 4 or 5 days ago, the Russians passed some sort of regulation for their wealth funds that they were going to go out and buy silver. Why is that? I mean, you could be a conspiracy theorist and say they want to bankrupt the Western bullion banking system. But let's assume that's not true. They're buying silver because they see it as an extremely precious metal, and they see it as something which is wildly undervalued relative to gold. So, and I think it's probably an indication of where Russian policy is going on gold, rather than anything necessarily about silver. I mean, Russia is vying for the second largest output by gold mine of gold, vying that position with Australia, China being number one. So she's already got all the gold she needs, and it seems to me it makes an awful lot of sense for her to wander in and start buying silver. Apart from anything else, it is an extremely useful material for industrial purposes, and I don't see that changing. Even if silver runs up to $100 an ounce, I don't see if you like, the qualities of silver being matched by anything else in terms of its applications. So where does it stop? This is bid only to me. It's quite simple. And incidentally, the point I was making in my article about silver is that it's not, it's by no means overbought or anything like that. There are no extreme positions in the futures market. But we do have a situation whereby the swaps, if you like, the bullion bank trading desks are short, and they are being squeezed. And some of these banks are also being squeezed in the gold market, in the gold futures market. So there is the potential for the derivatives markets, if you like, in precious metals to seize up. And that would be catastrophic for us, I must say.
This position, the fundamental-based argument that you just laid out, is one that reminds me of the way that Rick Rule has often coached us to think. He says he loves, like a Cheshire cat grinning, he likes to position himself in areas that are entirely overlooked, neglected, where he knows that he's right, where he knows that the fundamentals the truth will out, and this will impress itself upon everyone eventually just by the force of reality. This is the case that you just, I think, laid out, is that silver is irreplaceable and it has high utility, irreplaceable utility in important industry demand going forward, and there's no substitute for it, etc. And yet we're in a supply deficit year after year after year, and you just can't, those two can't continue in parallel. Some people would argue one way of resolving that is a catastrophic depression of our global economy to where industrial demand just falls flat. Any any observations from you as an economist looking forward about that being, of all likely outcomes and scenarios, if you're trying to be a contrarian and you're saying, well, that could kind of upset the whole apple cart in a way that would relieve the demand, how likely, in your view, is that kind of a safety valve that would also be a catastrophic outcome for everyone financially, but still relieving this ongoing, burgeoning and intense future demand on silver that outbalances the supply?
Yeah, it's a very, very big topic, but I'll try and be as brief as possible on it. The first thing you must forget is this idea that a recession is a fall off in demand for products. Yes, it is. But at the same time, it's not as if products are being manufactured at the same pace as they were before then. This is Say's law, which was turned down by Keynes on spurious grounds in order to make his argument that there's a role for the state to come in there and ensure that demand continues. But the fallacy in all this is that when you get higher unemployment, it is because businesses are shutting down production. So the supply, if you like, also falls. Now, that's part of the story. Obviously, it's not the whole story. If you do get, a slump, let's call it a slump. Let's go old-fashioned and call it a slump, which is really what it is. This recession rubbish is meant to confuse us. It's rather like the mainstream media talking about Ukraine. It's a slump. We're going to have a slump. Okay, let's assume we have a slump. Then obviously demand for raw materials to feed production declines. So while the costs of production remain, don't fall that much, probably even go higher, the material cost input into the production chain actually does fall. Fine, we can accept that. This is an argument under sound money, because you are assuming that the purchasing power of the currency which you are measuring the value of commodities in remains constant, doesn't change. This is not the case we have today. The economic conditions that happen with a slump undermine the currency very substantially. And so what you will see is you won't see a fall in the price of silver or copper or whatever. You'll see a fall in the purchasing power of the dollar, which is the principal currency in which we trade all these things in. You'll see the fall in the value, if you like, of measured by the dollar, a fall in the value of the dollar, if you like, measured in terms of commodities, which will be faster than any fall in real terms of the value of the commodities themselves. It's quite simple. I mean, it's amazing that modern economists, macroeconomic theory, and all this sort of stuff, they turn their back on classical economics, but they don't turn their backs on some of the lessons. They're very, very selective about it. What they like to do is to say that, let's look, for example, at money supply in the Depression. Money supply contracted by something like 40%. Okay, that was a major contraction. And at the same time, the purchasing power measured in goods and services by gold or by the dollar, which was on a gold standard, rose. So, this was, you put 2 and 2 together and get 5. You sort of think, hold on, what's driving prices up is a contraction in credit. No, it wasn't actually. Basically, the reason that credit contracted was because some 6,000 banks went bust. In other words, the credit was evaporating completely, along with the other side, the obligations, if you like, to pay it. Because if the bank goes bust, it's not going to honor the deposits. That's really what happened. And we saw that the conditions which Roosevelt decided, needed to, the way to deal with this was to devalue the dollar, which he did in 2 stages. He first of all called in any gold certificates, as it were, and any gold held by individuals. And I understand from my colleague James Turk, who has researched all this pretty much over the years, that it was only the banks who actually submitted gold. So if you got your money, if you got your gold coins in a bank, I mean, get it out quick, put it somewhere else. The banking system will not be your friend in this sort of situation. And then, of course, he devalued the dollar from, if you measure it in terms of per ounce of gold, from 20.67 down to 35. It was a 40% devaluation, just like that. In other words, you were robbed. You American citizens were robbed by your government. That was the solution to the thing. But it wasn't a solution because the Depression continued right until World War II, when you finally joined in the European war, fortunately on our side. So it was not a solution at all. If anything, it prolonged the depression. So, but getting back to the value of the dollar under these circumstances, I cannot see how anything can happen to the dollar other than its collapse. What could the government do to stop it? Well, first of all, they would have to cut government spending hugely. And Keynesians would say you can't possibly do that in a slump. We're now calling it a slump. So, we're in a mess. We're in a frightful mess. You can't, there's no way out of this. And that's the reality of it. And of course, the whole thing is showing up in a debt trap, 36.5 trillion and counting. Foreign holders no longer buying it. I mean, there are some foreign demand, but that's sort of almost US entities by proxy, like the captive insurance industry in the Caymans, pension funds, global pension funds, who sort of try and, the actuaries tell them what to do. So, but other than that, there is no demand. That's why there's no funding, material funding going out along the yield curve. And that yield curve, incidentally, is going from negative, it's going to level, and it'll go positive, in my view. And I don't think it'll be very long before it does that. And then people will be saying, well, what does this mean? Well, I can tell you, it means the cost of funding is going up, which is not good.
Alasdair, for those who want to stay abreast of your prolific writing on a weekly basis and more often on these topics, how should they get connected with you?
Well, most of my writing, and it's really an attempt at education, and I think it is a desperately important role to fulfill. I have my own Substack channel for both paid and free subscribers. That's Alasdair.Macleod. Alasdairmacleod.substack.com, and I think I really do urge people, if they really want to understand these dangers, to subscribe, come on board, and I'll try and teach you about it with a view so that you can protect you and your family and your community, because it's not a selfish thing just to rush out and buy a few coin and stash them. You've also got to think of others, because this is going to be very, very nasty. It really is. It's going to be very bad for communities.
I'm very glad you brought that up, and we don't have time to explicate that properly, but we have seen so many examples throughout history, including FDR in 1933 when he was calling in the gold, basically blaming those who did hold gold coin as locking up the money so that the economy couldn't prosper, and actually in full page newspaper ads, very much dividing the people so that it's basically turning each other against each other, saying those are the people that are the enemies of prosperity, those people who are hoarding, those people who are being selfish, and you need to do the right thing yourself. You need to make sure that your family members and those are doing the right thing too. Don't be an enemy of the people. I'm now using words he didn't use, but this was the very strong message, was that those who were being responsible, those who were taking care of business for themselves, for their families, were being selfish and were hoarders and were the enemy of the greater good. We saw that again most recently during the lockdowns, etc., that you were a threat to the public health if you just tried to live your life. Unless you got on board, unless you did everything the authorities were telling everyone to do, you were the enemy of the people. And this has been trotted out again now, just in what you're talking about, is that those who have been storing up supplies. We've been doing reluctant preppers since 2013, telling people that you should have food, you should have water, you should have the things that you need, means of protection and sound money, etc. And there have been messages from officialdom coming out saying those who are hoarding are the ones who are depriving others of what they need. So this is a playbook that is being used again and will likely be pulled out in full force. So just be prepared for that psychologically and emotionally, that just doing the right thing, doing the prudent thing, doing the traditional thing, doing the responsible thing, doing the thing that your grandparents, your great-grandparents, and your great-great-grandparents would have done is going to be publicized by government mouthpiece media and everything as being against the good of others and heartless. So weaponizing our own sense of decency and empathy against each other, and also playing that button on our emotional piano key that says divide. These are your enemies. They're the ones who are causing the trouble, not those who have been mismanaging your finances for a century or more.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think, I'd ask the question: who is more important to you, your family or your government? I have a very simple answer to that, and it's not the government, I can tell you.
Yes, and I'm just pointing out to people who are so good-natured and so good-hearted that we are susceptible. We're vulnerable to this twisted messaging that will present to us 7/24 through all the major media channels that you are hurting your neighbor, you're hurting your fellow man, you're hurting your country by not giving up everything that you have and by hoarding and by being greedy in that way. So don't listen to that. You got to do what's responsible. If our government hasn't been responsible, I mean, it's like, honestly, just by analogy, if we were living with a drunken sailor who spends all the family's money or whatever, and they're running out their credit lines, and their creditors are beating at the doors, and they're saying, it's you rotten people who in the family who are hoarding all the money. It's like, no, there's place the responsibility where it is. So anyway, just encouraging people to trust your gut, trust your responsible intuition, do the right thing, and not listen to that kind of, unfortunately, very divisive, because it can tear families apart. It can tear communities apart. We need to not let that happen, but band together and support each other, help each other along the way in ways that are responsible, and not just following our spendthrift government down the road to ruin. Alasdair, thank you so much. You've entertained us. And frankly, I always appreciate when we can broaden out. You apologized a couple of times for going off topic, but I think that it solidifies the wholeness, the holistic reality of what we're dealing with. It isn't just a topic of economic facts. Economics is woven in with all other aspects of our lives. So thank you very much for broadening that perspective for us. I appreciate it. I know our viewers do too. They look forward incessantly. They tell me, when are you going to get Alasdair back on? So thank you for being here with us. And again, people, you've got to check out Alasdair's Substack at Macleod Finance. And Alasdair, as always, thank you for joining us here on Liberty and Finance.
That's very much my pleasure.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for October 7th through October 14th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature Australian silver kangaroos at just $2.99 over spot. Next, backdated 1-ounce gold Canadian maples are just $60 over spot. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.